I'm just saying that if you're going to insist on having a melodramatic plot, you could have had a bit of a camera go whoosh. These characters don't get along. Well, then make that conflict flashy. Make it razzle dazzle.
Hey, how'd you know I lived here?
I'm not here to see you. I need to see my daughter.
You're her. Go. Huh?
Hi, I'm Lady Genevieve, and on my channel I talk about entertainment media. We are covering a weird one today, romance girlies, because I attended a press screening of Reminders of Him, the film adaptation of the book of the same name, written by Colleen Hoover. I did a source material video about this late last year just to let the people know this is happening, and for better or worse, we will be talking about this when the day comes. And the day is here. For context, I do not rate this book favorably. I've read 4 Colleen Hoover books, only ever as research for film adaptations. So yes, that does mean we'll be covering Verity later this year, as I cover many an adaptation here on my channel. The writing in this book is so monosyllabic and pedestrian. The overly simplistic writing style does help me to finish these books faster when I'm doing research, so there is a convenience to that element. But there is absolutely nothing in here to draw me in or make me want to recommend this book to anyone. When I tell you that watching the film was more pleasant than reading the book, that's really not saying much. Now that being said, there was such a mixed bag of choices I approved of and others I did not in how this was adapted. We'll be going through all of those things, but I'm just going to say from the very start, the film is very similar to the book. They changed a couple of things, presumably because of how they wanted certain aspects of the story to develop, and other things needing to be cut for time so that they could make sure that they wouldn't go past that 2-hour runtime. But being that this is the case, I'm going to say from the start that spoilers are fair game in this video. Spoilers for the book, spoilers for the film, oftentimes they are one and the same, and I will be saying any number of them. If you simply want to know whether or not you should see this, I would say that if you enjoy the book, then I might recommend seeing the film as well. If you're wanting to see a grand romance to be swept up in on the big screen, maybe not the film that will best provide that, but if you really like Maika Monroe as a performer and you just want to see her in anything and everything, you might consider seeing this, as she's given the most to do and she performs the sadness and anguish as if she's spent the last decade playing traumatized final girls in horror films. Oh, wait a minute.
No. Just stop. Just give me a sec.
A bit of a plot overview for anyone uninitiated. Reminders of Him tells the story of Kenna, a woman who has just spent the last few years in prison for accidentally causing the death of her boyfriend Scotty. They got into a car accident, she was driving, and he did not survive the injuries he sustained in that car crash. She turned out to be pregnant and gave birth while still incarcerated, and her baby was taken away. Scotty's parents got full custody of baby Diem. That's the name Kenna chose, as in Carpe Diem.
Not a joke, just a fact.
And upon getting out of prison, she makes her way back to the town so that she can try to meet her 5-year-old daughter Diem and hopefully be able to have some sort of a relationship with her. But not long after returning, she happens to meet the guy from the bar.
I am here to bang the hot guy that hit on me at the bar.
And said bartender is a man named Ledger, who just so happens to have been Scotty's best friend when he was alive, except he and Kenna never met back then because Ledger was too busy being away in the NFL. Because why? Because he is him. Something drama and mess, because romance, but she's a single mom who works 2 jobs. Look, should we just go through the list so you can see how much back and forth I had in trying to keep track of decisions I liked and the ones I disliked? Sure. Allez. They kept the thing from the book of Kenna moving into her rundown apartment and the landlady giving her a kitten. And I was delighted because another adaptation we reviewed on here was People We Meet on Vacation. Read the book first, made a source material video on that, and then we reviewed the film. And I did mostly like that film, but I was irked because in the book, Tom Blythe's character had a black cat with special needs, but in the film, there was no cat to be seen anywhere. I also happen to have a black cat with special needs, and I don't appreciate having my direct representation being erased in this way.
Who needs relationships when kittens?
But they clearly indulged in allowing this cat to have plenty of camera time, and guess what? I approve. Any and every work of fiction is better if a cat is in it, simply living. Ledger's truck looks so Bella Swan coded, and as a Catherine Hardwicke defender, specifically in the context of how it's sexist nonsense that she was booted off of the Twilight films, when she made the best one, she made it a hit on an indie budget, and then after she made it a hit, they brought men in to direct the rest of them. I rebuke that. And the first Twilight film is the best one, I will keep saying it. For those of you who are uninitiated to the harrowing experience of trying to read the monosyllabic writings of Colleen Hoover, she has a few recurring tendencies, and it's weird that I have only read 4 books of hers and already I can spot them. One of them is her hatred for the color orange. It took up far too much space in the Regretting You book. They turned it into a short film in that book. Yes, really. A short film about the color orange. Ledger's truck is orange, but another recurring thing in stories that she writes is a very odd tendency to romanticize cheating. There's always some sort of, well, actually, well, technically energy towards people stepping out of relationships. I will spare you the full explanation of this when it comes to the other books of hers that I've read, but as it applies to today's topic, Reminders of Him. In the book, Scotty asks Kenna on a date while she's working, and later when he comes to pick her up, he says that the reason he is late to picking her up is that he needed to go break up with his girlfriend. Ugh. Ledger's best friend Roman in the book, he has this infatuation with a married woman who works at a bakery near Ledger's bar, where Roman also works.
Has the planet gone mad?
The film, thankfully, has the tact to remove that nonsense because what on earth was any of that? However, this is a very weird, I don't know if nitpick would be the word, but that scene where Kenna and Scotty are meeting for the first time in the film and it's trying to be romantic, the song that is playing is the same one that you will hear play in the trailer when this scene is shown. And to this day, I still don't know what that song is. I could have looked it up, done a lyric search, but I thought it would be funnier for this video to not look it up, so I have not, but I will say that this song did not work for me. I'm not saying that it's a bad song or that it will ring other viewers wrong in this way, but when I hear that oohing, I immediately think of that one Jenna Marbles video where she and Julian are watching TikToks and someone falls backward onto snow as if it's going to be soft and they will simply fall into the snow. But the snow is actually kind of hard, so they just thunk onto the snow pile and fall down. When Kenna goes into the bar and meets Ledger for the first time and he's making her coffee, there's a point where the camera cuts to this really close-up shot of him. It's very close coverage, and he kind of looks her up and down, but not in a sleazy way, but in a way that presents that spark, that zing of attraction. And I remember thinking, ooh, good directing choice, good editing choice. Maybe we're in for something good. But this is actually where it might be ideal to address one of the larger points of discussion. The film and the book, I would argue, largely sell themselves as being romance stories. They are definitely dramas. It's not only a romance story in either iteration, but you look at the movie poster, the trailer, it's definitely selling a strong suggestion that you're going to watch a romance. But honestly, I would argue that the romance felt secondary to all of the other relational drama wrapped up in the death of Scotty and the separation of Kenna and Diem. And they just don't lean in hard enough to the romanticism or the passion as much as they probably should in order to effectively titillate the target audience. It felt like a weirdly sanitized take on the story, like you're trying to appeal to an audience that would be offended if you were to show too much salaciousness. Listen, I'm not expecting to see some extreme erotica born on AO3 copied and pasted onto the screen, but I did reread the book shortly before I was set to see this press screening just to refresh myself on certain details. Kenna and Ledger get very physical with each other, salaciously, consensually, very shortly after they met for the first time. This was before he learned who she really was, though. And in general, it felt like the film's passion was being pushed towards something that could be more easily sold to a, dare I say, puritanical audience. It wasn't just the alteration of them not hooking up right away, a day after they had met for the first time, but just the overall presentation of the film and what they were or were not willing to do in regards to how much they would lean into those feelings of passion and attraction and interweaving those things into the larger drama of why they shouldn't be sneaking around and getting involved with one another.
More than a fan, we're involved.
Okay.
The scene where Kenna shows up to Grace and Patrick's house for the first time, those are Scotty's parents who have custody of Diem. Ledger sees her outside, so he goes to talk to her, and upon realizing who she is, he insists that she go to his house across the street, and he's supposed to be upset and angry. But the way that he emoted in the film felt oddly muted, and I did notice this more than once, where the degree to which Ledger was emoting what should have been a more showy display of emotion, he was more reserved in his delivery, and I didn't understand that choice. And I didn't look at this as a matter of Tyriq not being able to emote, but more so it led me to assume that he was being directed to do something more low-key. And it was odd because when I compare that to some of the more emotional, intense moments for Kenna, namely the flashback to when you see the night that Scotty died, we have this car crash, the car flips, and Maika Monroe comes stumbling out of the car and she's disoriented, distressed, there's blood, and I went, there's my girl, there's the final girl from horror films I've seen time and time again. She will survive this because that's what she does. When Kenna is in the police station because the police have brought her in to interrogate her, and they reveal to her that Scotty actually was alive, she thought that he was dead because she had checked his wrist for a pulse, but the circulation had been cut off to that arm, so she couldn't find a pulse. But anyway, Maika Monroe, in character as Kenna, she is delivered this horrific emotional blow, this devastating reveal that Scotty was alive when she ran off trying to find help. Maika as Kenna delivers this emotional outburst, this scream, but the editing cuts her off in the middle of it. Why would you do that? Why would you not showcase your strongest asset in this film? One of the main reasons I was hopeful that this film could potentially elevate itself significantly above its source material is because you have a highly experienced leading lady of the horror genre. You have Maika Monroe, of all people, being hired to play a woman who is distressed, full of anguish and despair. She is struggling, a bit like all of the times that Maika Monroe has played a woman trying not to die because some man or some supernatural entity is trying to get her. So that begs the question of what sort of tone this film is trying to have. It's like it's afraid of really throwing itself into the pit of despair. Maybe because you're worried it will put the larger audience off, and you don't want to be too salacious, because why? You're worried about ruffling the feathers of who? Conservative viewers? And you don't want Tyriq to overly emote, because why? Were they worried about him perhaps embodying the type of overly angry toxicity of a lot of male main characters in traditional romance stories? Because there had to have been a better happy medium that would have allowed him to be more emotionally expressive in a way that would serve the character and the story at large. I will give you another example of this. When Kenna finally tells Ledger about the night Scotty died, and she fills in the blanks of what had really happened, when she finishes her story, he tells her, "I'm sorry you lost him." And his delivery was so flat I could hardly believe it. And to be clear, I do not blame Tyriq for this, because it's the director's responsibility to be able to guide an actor if the delivery needs to be different. Why would you just move on from that without getting a better take to use than whatever that was? But at the same time, I can't necessarily say that the directing overall is completely bad, because there were things about the overall vision of the look of the film that I liked. There were nice moments, visually speaking. You had these contrasting colors, like the green walls of Paradise Apartments with pink lighting during a scene of Kenna and Ledger talking. And when the two of them went to get burgers together, there are blue lights while they sit on the back of his orange truck. And anytime I would see visually stylish things like these, I would be more optimistic about what was still to come from the film and what my overall impression and rating of the film might end up being. We would have these beautiful shots of the trees and looking out to the forest, and the town itself that they're filming in has this really rustic feel to it. And then I had a thought of realizing, oh no, this should have been shot on film. When I imagine this setting with this angst-ridden story through the lens of being on film, with the added texture of visible film grain, that is probably a prime example of what my overarching issue with this film is. It is so frequently a few degrees off of being good, but the film can't seem to commit to a bolder vision, that might have elevated this adaptation to sit far above its mediocre source material. It also felt like a missed opportunity to remove Ledger's parents from the adaptation. Many of the film's moments that got the most audible responses at my screening, the positive ones, were the funny parts. And Ledger's parents in the book were agents of chaos. They brought comedy to the forefront. Now, they're not clowns per se, but they're eccentric, and they're yet another window into Ledger of how he has become the person we see. I will tell you some of the comedic parts that got the biggest laughs at my screening. For one, anything Lady Diana, that's Kenna's neighbor at Paradise Apartments, who also works at the same grocery store as Kenna, her line delivery was excellent. And she was a way to inject some energy into the sometimes meandering pace of this story. When Ledger first hires Kenna to work some shifts at his bar and he brings her in for the first time as an employee, his best friend Roman gives the two of them some truly hilarious, knowing, judgmental looks. They're not mean-spirited, but he is the mirror image of the audience, staring with equal parts judgment and amusement. I was laughing. Others in the audience were laughing. It's as if the film's narrative is so desperate to be serious and be taken seriously, but it offers so little to warrant that type of regard that when you have these characters that humorously disrupt that, that's when we can finally connect. That's when the communal response happens from the audience. If the film wanted to simply lift the book material and place it onto a visual medium, I would say that it mostly accomplished that. But there was so much else they could have done to try something new, make this work of art be able to stand on its own merits and draw in a broader audience. In particular, when you have a film like this playing on the big screen, I think you owe it to the audience and to all of the artistic, creative people who are collaborating to make this to do something more. Infuse some flashier visual choices. Maybe you lean into the melodrama with the acting and emotional expression so that it veers slightly more in the direction of K-dramas, telenovelas, just something, anything to wow the audience, be it visually arresting or emotionally gripping, something meta and more humorous, or indulging in the seductive, passionate appeal of watching two people fall in love. When I really sit back and reflect on the sum of all of the parts of this film, the good and the bad, and how it all comes together, the more I come to realize that Reminders of Him is far too muted in its overall delivery. The emotional highs and lows aren't impactful enough after so much buildup. Maika Monroe and Tyriq Withers are held back by the film's lack of commitment to forging a bold artistic vision all its own. They have their moments, though. There's a point where she's started working at his bar and he's just looking at her while she's in the back and only somewhat visible to him, but he can't help but watch her while he's working behind the bar. And I'm going, okay, well, why don't we get to see more of this? This is yearning. This is what we want to see in a film that's advertising itself as something romantic. But alas, this is yet another adaptation that has failed to live up to its own potential. Here's hoping the next adaptation I review will be more to my liking. But before any of that, we are going to have a new source material video on my channel that will be coming up soon-ish in the docket, either late March or early April. It's been a while since I did one that wasn't related to Bridgerton. Though I do still have another Bridgerton review to do to finish off the season's coverage, but as far as a source material video goes, where I talk about a book before its adaptation gets released, the last one I did was Sunrise on the Reaping, so it will be fun to have a look at something that is brand new to me. If you're one of my patrons, you can check my reading log to see what that's going to be because it's already listed on there.